Buonasera, grazie per essere venuti. Siamo molto emozionati di avere qui Alexandra Munroe oggi, che come sapete è una dei maggiori studiosi di arte asiatica e ha prodotto nel corso della sua storia oltre 40 tra le più grandi mostre di arte asiatica, non solo, tra le quali anche una stupenda mostra su Daido Moriyama già nel 98, che un po' è stata precursore di quello che abbiamo fatto noi oggi al MAXXI. La mostra al MAXXI è incentrata sul lavoro di Daido Moriyama e Shomei Tomatsu, spero abbiate avuto modo di vederla in Galleria 3. Più che una mostra sulla fotografia posso dire che è una mostra sulla città. Tokyo è una delle città più aperte, una città cosmopolita che offre infinite occasioni di ispirazione e ha creato nel corso degli anni uno stile fotografico unico, catturato proprio anche da Daido Moriyama e Shomei Tomatsu. Entrambi si avvicinano alla città di Tokyo con uno sguardo critico, l'uno affascinato dall'americanizzazione dei costumi, delle grandi avanguardie che hanno rappresentato il dopoguerra in Giappone, l'altro Tomatsu con uno sguardo critico da un punto di vista quasi sempre politico, con un rigore formale che non contraddistingue appunto le immagini di Daido Moriyama. Sarò brevissima perché comunque voglio lasciare la parola ad Alexandra che appunto ci regala un intervento unico in Italia, però mi sento di dire che la mostra si presenta al pubblico con una struttura non predefinita, non canonica. Come forse molti di voi sapranno, molte delle opere provengono da un'esperienza precedente che è stata alla MEP di Parigi, cosa che ci ha anche consentito di avere delle opere originali incredibili che il Covid non ci avrebbe concesso di avere. Come saprete, Daido continua a lavorare nonostante la sua età, lui ha 83 anni, continua a uscire per le strade di Tokyo, a mappare questa città in maniera incessante, direi quasi bulimica, continua a costruire questo paesaggio visivo, questa mappatura ongoing che ci ricorda quasi un linguaggio joyciano, un romanzo senza fine. Entrambi sono stati segnati, l'uno dal progetto Provoke del 69 e l'altro dalla produzione di Record, che è un progetto ongoing che va avanti già dal 72. Siamo lieti di avere tutte le copie in consultazione in mostra. Ovviamente entrambi sono stati profondamente segnati dai movimenti del loro tempo, in particolare Daido Moriyama fortemente influenzato da William Klein, Andy Warhol, Kerouac, enfatizza anche le bruttezze della società consumistica di oggi, contrariamente a Shomei Tomatsu, che invece ha la prospettiva di un attivista e che ci restituisce delle opere fotografiche invece estremamente rigorose anche da un punto estetico, formale. Direi che una delle grandi fascinazioni di questa mostra è il presentarsi al pubblico in maniera informale. Da un lato abbiamo questi scatti estremamente raffinati, presentati anche in maniera appunto rigorosa, nelle foto di Shomei Tomatsu, dall'altro vediamo tutta l'essenza degli scatti di Moriyama, quindi le luci, le ombre, la città catturata anche nei suoi eccessi, nelle sue bruttezze, con dei punti di vista estremamente ravvicinati che regalano appunto questa mappatura incredibilmente violenta anche a tratti e sicuramente caratterizzata dalla sgranatura, dalla trama indefinita di questi scatti gestiti e catturati da Daido in un'ottica di movimento. È quasi un racconto cinematografico quello di Moriyama, però non voglio andare oltre perché sono sicura che Alexandra Munroe saprà regalarci una visione unica. Vorrei solo approfittare per dire che oggi è arrivato il catalogo della mostra in due versioni. È un oggetto incredibile perché è un cofanetto in 3 volumi, che ho appena distrutto, stampato in Giappone, e c'è anche una edizione speciale che contiene una foto firmata dell'artista, quindi un'opera a tutti gli effetti, ed è arrivato oggi, quindi siamo estremamente orgogliosi e ci fa piacere se avete modo di vederlo al bookshop.
Grazie Elena, io vorrei aggiungere 2 cose. Alessandra fa parte del comitato scientifico di MAXXI, infatti è un grande consiglio per noi, sempre per aprire un po' il nostro orizzonte di pensiero, di visione della creazione contemporanea. E anche Alessandra ha lavorato prima di essere curatore di Guggenheim per Asian arte asiatica, era anche la direttrice di Japan Foundation a New York, Japan Society, scusa. Questo è molto importante perché era una galleria, uno spazio che ha giocato un ruolo molto importante per la promozione della creazione contemporanea di Giappone, e lei ha fatto una mostra molto importante negli anni 92, 3, non ricordo, 4. Si chiama Scream Against the Sky. Questa è una delle prime grandi mostre su l'arte d'avanguardia di Giappone. C'è un impatto molto, molto importante. E il resto lascio a Alessandra di raccontare la sua visione su Daido e la fotografia giapponese.
Grazie mille. Grazie Elena, grazie Hanru. Thank you to everyone here at MAXXI. It is do you want to give this to the translator or va bene senza? Okay. Un momento. Thank you so much. Buonasera. I also, it's a great honor to be here, and it is indeed a great honor to serve on the scientific committee for MAXXI. I think the program that MAXXI has been doing over the last many years, and I think especially under Hanru's direction in the visual arts, is among the most dynamic and vital and tough and truly global of any museum of contemporary art, not only in Europe, but really in the world. So, bravi a tutti, bravi a tutti. I also want to acknowledge my dear colleague, Ming Tianpo, Professor Ming Tianpo of Ottawa University, who has been resident in Rome for the last 4 years. And was co-curator with me at the Guggenheim Museum on the 2013 exhibition of Gutai. And so I'm very honored that my dear colleague is here with me tonight as well. Grazie. So I thought what we would try and do tonight is give a little context to your fantastic show. And really, really bravi. It is alive. I felt very nostalgic. My past was nostalgic, not just my future. In how you installed this exhibition. Although this is work that is very historic, it's very grounded in the post-war culture and politics and society of Japan, you have presented it in a way that is very contemporary. I think Daido would also be very happy. It is also filled with cacophony. And I think this is also very important to Daido's practice. And you have shown that, you've mirrored that in the installation design. So really congratulations and thank you. So Daido Moriyama emerged at a time when debates on photography centered on realism. Should a photograph capture objective fact, or should it express subjective truth? In Japan, many lesser photographers were quick to emulate the styles associated with each school. And by doing so, they hastened the ascendancy of orthodox styles in the 1950s and 60s. Daido was among the first to break through the formal and ideological constraints of each school, the objective versus the subjective, to forge an expressionist style that was wholly his own. Rather than locating realism in either the objective or subjective realm in static objects of photography, Moriyama found realism in the act of taking a photograph itself. And I'm going to read at length, or you can read, a rather lengthy quotations from his essay, The Camera as a Means of Confirming the Self, from 1985, because I think that it shares a philosophy, his kind of what he calls his structural principles, better than any curator or scholar could say. I'll just let you read these. He says, I brush aside words and ideas and focus on photography as a means of expressing a message that is both physiological and phenomenological.
You should return to the page before the quotation. Yes.
Okay, is that the one?
Yes.
Physiological che phenomenological. Which I think is very important because he comes back again and again to the importance of the body, that taking a photograph is an act, it's a bodily act, it's a corporeal act. And this also, you'll find, relates to many other movements in the post-war Japanese avant-garde who were also interested in the material of the body across many different realms of the art world. Without that framework, my approach is very simple. There is no artistry. I just shoot freely. For example, most of my snapshots I take from a moving car or while running without a finder. In those instances, one might say that I am taking the picture more with my body than with my eyes. I think that the process gives my photos more a sense of place and existence, more atmosphere. The essay goes on to say, my photos are often out of focus, rough, streaky, warped. But if you think about it, a normal human being will in one day perceive an infinite number of images, and some are focused upon, others are barely seen out of the corner of one's eyes. I do not mean to give excuses for my photographs, but perhaps this is the underlying structure, the crucial origins of my photographic style. For me, photography is not the endeavor to create a two-dimensional work of art, but by taking photo after photo, I come closer to the truth and reality at the very intersection of the fragmentary nature of the world and my own personal sense of time. To differentiate subjective and objective photography is nonsense. So here in this line, he's rejecting the two top schools of contemporary photography at that time. It's nonsense to differentiate. The exploration of the possibilities of photography is, in the end, inseparable from the individual's explorations of the possibilities of life. And this is where he is approaching photography not as a document, not as an art, but as vita. It is as life itself. And this is his radical move. This is what's the radical. It's photography as experience. It's the experiential, phenomenological nature of the photograph that makes his work so important. And again, I think it's what makes your show also so incredibly important, because you convey that sense of the phenomenological nature of his work. So the quote is over. Moriyama insists on photography as a kind of action of art, on recording the fragmentary substance of time itself, informed by the intellectual and cultural concerns of the Japanese post-war avant-garde, with its pervasive existential and nihilistic bent. He expunged its nostalgia and politics to forge a far more immediate and unmediated art. So today, I would like to sketch out the forces that influenced Moriyama as a young photographer in the late 50s and early 60s, and to draw out what make his work so radical in the context of post-war and to some extent contemporary Japanese photography. The formal innovations and intellectual concerns that defined the style for post-war Japanese photography were the foundation for Moriyama. Documentary photography, Vivo, the movement of Vivo that Tomatsu, who is also part of this show, was very much part of and a founder of, and also Provoke, which I think you also touch on in your exhibition. Moriyama's position, rooted in the post-war consciousness, yet more vital than ever to contemporary Japan, I'd say to contemporary the world, can best be assessed by understanding the larger cultural histories of modern Japanese photography. Like any narrative, it is one Moriyama resists. I was not against America or the war or politics, he has argued. I was against photography. So the next few photographs I'm going to show are all taken by Tomatsu, and some are in your exhibition, all taken in Tokyo and the Yokosuka US military base. So these are just as background. The period from 1955 to 1970 marks one of the most tumultuous in modern Japanese history. Beneath the veneer of spectacular economic recovery and mobilization towards peace, prosperity, and progress, social and political turmoil rocked the tenuous foundation of post-war Japan. The Neo-Dada art movement, underground theater, new wave cinema, and Ankoku Buto all arose in the mid to late 1950s in direct correspondence to the rising left-wing opposition against statism, Americanization, and the renewal of the US-Japan Security Treaty, emblemized by the ongoing presence of the US military bases, including nuclear bases in Japan. On the stage and in the streets and in the new journals that proliferated during this period, these emerging artists and intellectuals launched a critique of the ideologies of cultural modernization. They envisioned, framed, and designed a process of reform that was rooted in the existential situation of the masses, in everyday experience, not universal ideals. that took place outside the formal bounds of institutionalized politics, and indeed outside the formal bounds of any institutional framework. You must realize this is a time when there was maybe one or two at the most museums of modern art, and none of them, to my knowledge, was showing photography yet. Most of these photographs that they made at this time were made for publications. There weren't even galleries at this time. A Museum of Modern Art in New York was really the only museum at the time that was showing or collecting work by contemporary photographers, including these photographers in the 1970s. But in Japan, photography as an art form was just being accepted and just being part of the larger cultural discourse. So, of course, at the center of their thinking was also the terrible knowledge that these artists alone possessed of nuclear annihilation. Japan as ruins, as gaping emptiness, was their ultimate subject. Because they conflated the treaty, the US-Japan treaty, security treaty, with the possibility of atomic warfare, opposition to the treaty was essentially a humanist anti-nuclear appeal. Early post-war photojournalism emerged as part of this tremendous societal unrest. After the suppression of the war years, when amateur photographic groups were banned, leading journals were shut down, and photojournalists were engaged to serve the war effort even well into the 1940s, the immediate post-war period saw a proliferation of photographers and publishers dedicated to photo reportage. Their intellectual mandate was to document social realities with, quote, fearless objectivity, and to use the camera as an instrument of truth that would counter the perceived distortions of history. New magazines documented the industry with such slogans as, "Photographs convey the truth." Working within a social realist framework that in other art forms were also was the dominant mode of art making, especially in Tokyo, the post-war photojournalists focused on images of atomic bomb survivors, victims of industrial pollution, and rural poverty. One of the key figures in this early immediate post-war movement who coined the term the realistic photography movement was Ken Domon. He was a radical who had once been imprisoned and became instrumental in the early 1950s in founding the Shudan Photo Group, a collective that held annual exhibitions with Western photographers, some of whom were working in Japan also, whose work expressed social commitment, including, as Elena said, Margaret Burke-White, Bill Brandt, Henri Cartier-Bresson, and W. Eugene Smith. Eugene Smith was there and also did a very famous series of photographs on water pollution in the late 1950s. The other artist other than Ken Domon was, of course, Kikuji Kawada. Working in Hiroshima, in the ruins of the nuclear bomb, and the Chikuho coal mines, Domon and also Kikuji achieved national acclaim for startling portraits of children damaged by war and exploitative labor conditions. Clinical, even dispassionate, Domon rejected deliberate artfulness to establish a legacy of evidence. His objective documentary style forged this realismus shashin undo movement, which strongly influenced the history of post-war photojournalism. And again, remember, this is before the very strong Marxist and union labor movement and student movement that really brought in and empowered the Communist Party really developed, which was more in the mid to late 1950s. So the labor conditions in Japan in the immediate post-war period really, really were atrocious. And these were the photographers who really brought this work through photojournalism, meaning their work was published in magazines. They are not showing it in galleries and museums. They are showing it to the people. They're bringing it to the public. And it is really in this context that Tomatsu Shomei emerges. Tomatsu Shomei, born in when was he born? 1931, so he's about a decade older than Daido. It becomes Daido's teacher and becomes the leading brain, both discursively, philosophically, artistically, for a group of artists around a movement that comes to be known as vivo, which is the Esperanto term for life. Again, back to life, back to that vita. And in 1961, Daido Moriyama leaves Osaka for Tokyo, hoping to join the Vivo group, which was this radical collective of contemporary photojournalists. But the week he arrives, they disbanded. But he made friends with Eiko Hosoe, as well as with Shomei Tomatsu, and apprentices to them both. So the two giants of the new photography become Daido's mentors, and they take him literally into his studio. The Vivo artists were all born in the 1930s and raised under Japan's imperialist regime. So they were old enough to know the war. And they came of age amid war, amid catastrophic defeat, and amid the devastation of the immediate post-war period. They emerged in the mid-1950s in their 20s as youths who, disappointed in institutionalized politics and resisting blanket Americanization of the American occupation, were dedicated to the possibilities of art to transform Japan's socially entrenched statism, which is what emerges in the guise of Japanese democracy, is really a statism. Most of all, their subject was post-war Japan, its modernity, its identity, and its wartime past, which was silenced but not gone. Tomatsu, of course, was the key figure, and he did several series focusing not on Hiroshima, which was the far better known site of the atomic bomb of August 6, 1945, but rather he trained his camera on Nagasaki, the second town in Kyushu that was bombed on August 9th. And what was remarkable about Nagasaki that was not even known to the American bombers is that it was the center of Catholicism in Japan, going back to the late 1500s and early 1600s. And that the epicenter of the bomb was actually the cathedral, which you see here, the cathedral in ruins. And what's interesting about Tomatsu's photojournalistic assignment was it was assigned by the Soviet Communist Party, who wanted to understand more about the long-term evidence and human kind of illnesses that emerge from atomic warfare that the Americans were not releasing to the public. But also because they were very strongly present and closely allied at that time to the Japanese Communist Party. And all of the photographers that we're speaking about were formally or informally very closely aligned to the Japanese Communist Party and the student movements that also came out of the Communist Party. So as Tomatsu, these are the victims of the keloid burns. This is 15 years after the bomb dropped, and no documentation had yet been made on the lasting scars and cancers, skin cancers that were affecting the women, children, and men and nature in Nagasaki. And as Tomatsu reflected, in Nagasaki, I witnessed not only the vestiges of war, but a post-war without end. I once believed that ruins were cities reduced to ashes. Nagasaki taught me that ruins can be found in the human soul. This is a helmet. This is actually one of Tomatsu's photographs of a military helmet that had been blasted by the blast and just left dented by the impact of the blast. Moriyama understood the political and social engagement at the heart of Tomatsu's project. It was an abiding humanism that was, of course, as I've said, sentimentally, but also deeply politically allied to left-wing ideas and to an urgency, a growing urgency, a call to action about the war and what Tomatsu calls the post-war without end. A second artist who was part of the Vivo movement, the Vivo school, was Eiko Hosoe. And this is the artist who met with Daido when he came to the Vivo studio in 1961, said, "We're closing next week, but come work with me." And Hosoe's kind of transmission to Moriyama was a sense of theatricality and also a sense of eroticism. And one of his most famous series was, of course, Barake, which is a collaboration he did with Yukio Mishima in 1961, where he puts Mishima in all these very homoerotic poses, drenched with roses. The Barake means killed by roses. In the Tokyo house, very Rococo style, horrible taste, horrible Rococo style house that was the novelist Mishima's home. And he's there clad in fundoshi, the traditional male loincloth, and posing with these hallucinatory poses suggesting bondage and death. There's also one of him as Saint Sebastian. Mishima himself, the great artist, recalled of this work with Hosoe, "The world to which I was abducted under the spell of Hosoe's lens was abnormal, warped, sarcastic, grotesque, savage, and promiscuous. It was, in a sense, the reverse of the world we live in, where our worship of social appearances and our concern for public morality and hygiene create foul, filthy sewers winding beneath the surface." And just to go back on the left, we also see another very famous series of Eiko Hosoe's, which was using the dancer Hijikata Tatsumi, who of course was the founder of Ankoku Buto. And he takes Hijikata into the north, into this very non-city, non-urban, non-Americanized area of rural Japan, deeply rural Japan, and poses Hijikata in these phantasmagorical performances set in northern Japan. They're sort of magical, they are ghostly, and Hijikata at his best right at the beginning of these movements that he is bringing into the lexicon of post-war Japanese dance and theater that really become the movements of the apocalypse itself. So let's see how these influenced Moriyama. This sense of theatricality, of course, influences Moriyama's first major series, which you have here on view, which is Japan, a photo theater. So, of course, he starts in the kabuki theaters, but he soon moved beyond into the streets and into the alleyways of Tokyo at that time. It is the dark lyricism of the urban landscapes and their obsession with uncanny realms of experience that become deeply interesting to Moriyama, and which he begins to document with his 35mm camera. And here he says it's about the chaotic everyday experience. That is really what our reality is all about. And these are all from Japan, a photo theater, and of course this very, very disturbing series of fetuses in the hospital, which I see you also have in the show. You know, it's very interesting to kind of contemplate all of this in terms of, you know, kind of ethics and morals. It's like they're beyond ethics, they're beyond morals. They're more interested in a world that is outside any kind of ethical or moral bounds. It's just the urgent reality and ugliness and horror, and again, what Elena said, the violence and brutalità of everyday life. So Moriyama found his theatricality naturally erupting at the periphery of urban landscapes in the Yokosuka bars, at Tokyo's street joints, backstage in cheap downtown kabuki theaters. He's aiming to capture a carnivalesque violence by riding through Shinjuku in a patrol car late at night and shooting what he saw through the car window. The appropriation that came to mark Moriyama's style further expressed his vision of the kitsch voyeurism that so pervades modern city life. Theatricality of modernity's debauched conditions becomes the subject of Moriyama's art, fulfilling the post-war photojournalistic ideal of shooting evidence of history that has become extremely mixed up. So the third artist and influence that I'd like to touch briefly on is Moriyama's great friend Takuma Nakahira and his journals Provoke, which you also have in the show. And here is a photograph of Nakahira, who of course was a huge figure. He was an activist, he was a political activist, he was a deeply thoughtful and very well-read Marxist critic. He read perfect French. He was on the streets in the Ampo riots that you saw a moment ago, and he drank a lot. And in 1977, he basically lost his memory from alcohol poisoning and just disappeared. He died in 2015, but he was basically a vegetable from 1977 on. But while he lived, I never met him, but people speak of him, the artists speak of him with reverence. There was a cult around Nakahira. And there's a lot of new work being done on Provoke. In 1968, he founded a quarterly journal called Provoke, which involved young poets and photographers in this strategy to challenge received notions of art and photography by breaking down formal conventions. So all this photography I've been showing you was still operating in the world of photography. It was still sort of a vivo photography. He wanted to break that down, bring in literature, bring in poetry, bring in philosophy, bring in politics, and of course really raise the stature of photography into publishing itself, which was already happening, but he makes a big deal of it in terms of graphic design. And again, I'm so happy that in your show you have all these fabulous vitrines where you really show that the outcome of this art form was publishing, was graphic design, and was meant to be seen in a very cinematic way.
I call it pre-internet social media.
Absolutely, totally, so much better than social media. And this is what he says of Nakahira himself, that Nakahira's logic lies in recognizing that a photograph's reality is in humanity, in history, in society. And this is what he takes from all that drinking together in Shinjuku and Zushi. I'd like to end with one of my favorite and far less better known series of Moriyama's, which is Tono Monogatari. Do you have it? Do you have Tono here?
No.
You don't have Tono. So I didn't find it. So it's one of my favorites because it's not well known. In the early 1970s, after years of really being obsessed with the city, Moriyama kind of follows Hijikata and goes into the rural villages of northern Japan, in particular to the village of Tono. To Moriyama and other artists and intellectuals of his age, Tono was known as the subject of a literary classic that was the founding work of Japanese folklore studies called The Tales of Tono, Tono Monogatari, which were compiled as oral history in 1910 by the pioneering ethnologist Kunio Yanagita. And this book, which was kind of rediscovered by this group in the 1960s, recounts episodes of murder, incest, grotesque births, ghost stories and mountain apparitions, deities and monsters, the surviving numinous of an older world that had seemingly escaped the rational systems of the modernizing state. And it was through Yanagita's influential work, Tono itself came to represent an authentic yet disappearing Japan, an Arcadia linked to the afterlife and threatened by effacement. The culmination of Moriyama's conceptual methodology as a photographer was his publication and exhibition in 1974 called Tono Monogatari, directly after Yanagita's book. And his choice of Tono as a subject was informed in part by his affinity for Yanagita's treatment of his topic, because Yanagita compiled the tales told to him by a local storyteller as a series of what Yanagita called present-day facts, genzai no jijitsu, an approach that Moriyama follows in his own expedition to record Tono village, everyday, present-day facts. Yanagita's 119 tales are brief and episodic, fragmentary and anti-narrative, structured overall without beginning or end, like a collage, anticipating Moriyama's own cinematic survey of contemporary Tono's village life. Over and over, we see Moriyama seeking out the immediacy of time and place by surrendering to the power of the site, what he calls the original landscape, genkei. In his writings on the Tales of Tono, Moriyama argues for the direct experience of existence that site itself evokes. So that goes back to the phenomenological aspect of his art that he was talking about early on. And it's this desire to return to the original landscape that causes a sort of personal reincarnation, rinne tensho, that Moriyama writes about, a recognition maybe of some facet of the self lodged in the past, which is aroused by an unexpected encounter with the image of a place. It's a kind of doubling. It's really the uncanny. For far more complex than straight objective or subjective viewing, Moriyama's art, through Tono and his later series, creates a landscape where the real and the illusory, history and memory all coexist. And it is in this realm of consciousness that Moriyama calls another country. So thank you very much. Grazie mille. Grazie a lei.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Such a beautiful, how to say,
Confession.
narration. And it's so important for us also, to contextualize Daido and Tomatsu's work in the museum. Of course, contextualization is always a very interesting thing to do for an exhibition, because we share the same, attitude of artists like Daido, that making art, it's not about making objects or images of representation, but really living into it.
Yeah.
And an exhibition, the difference between an exhibition and a book, for example, or a classroom lecture, it's that an exhibition is a place where you sense, you feel with all your senses the work and especially the process of the creation, right? So that's, I think in a way, we also wanted to make an exhibition as, erotic, as
it's very erotic.
Daido and Tomatsu's work would be, because being erotic meaning creating a intimate relationship between the work, the body, the senses of human beings, and also the relationship between the audience, the visitors. So we actually reconfigured this exhibition based on the earlier version that was in Paris, Maison Européenne de la Photographie, so the map. And in that, actually, we are very thankful to this first step of the exhibition that Simon Baker curated in that building, which is a more classical gallery, let's say. So the exhibition was separated into two parts. One is Daido, another is Tomatsu. Actually, the idea was coming from Daido to say that he wanted to really absolutely to realize a project that he was dreaming of, is to put himself next to his teacher.
Wonderful.
Right. So that was, and this is why actually in the exhibition, also in the book, and this is
great.
two photos
I love it.
that Daido photographed by Tomatsu,
Yeah.
Tomatsu photographed by
I love it.
by
He looks like Takashi
Daido.
Murakami there.
Yeah, so it's actually the Paris version was two other photos, and for the MAXXI version, and Daido chose another two images. And then to make this exhibition more, let's say, physical, more erotical, and more also contemporary, we decided to restructure the exhibition by mixing them together, these two artists' work, with a distinction of colors on the background. And this comes from a direct conversation with Daido, and to choose the colors, the yellow and the blue. Yellow is for Daido's work, and blue is for Tomatsu's work. And then the exhibition is structured in 10 different words. As you look at the introduction, actually from a book word, starting from this area that you have all these books, all the publications, and to a floating world, what we call it, is more general kind of images of the new modern consumerist landscape, to Shinjuku, this kind of secret words, and at the end you have also the erotic world, and so on. So there are 10 different zones, and we work with Daido very closely on creating these wallpapers that actually provide a direct kind of a background to the exhibition, but also they are a part of the works. And also we managed to work with his gallery in Tokyo, his publisher, with Nakasawa publisher.
Really fantastic.
Yeah, to develop a whole set of soundtracks.
Yes.
That if you go into the exhibition, you can feel the soundtrack, you can hear the noise of the city, and then we asked Daido to write, to handwrite his phrase in Italian and also in Japanese, in kanji, Tokyo and Shinjuku, and making this neon signs. But what is actually more interesting, more contemporary, is actually we decided to recycle the previous walls, the walls from the previous exhibitions designed by, actually there was an exhibition of Thomas Hirschhorn, who designed himself the walls, which is creating a labyrinth to stand against the original building.
I'm there. Like, I was there.
1982.
Yeah. So
I'm sure I'm on that platform.
Absolutely. We will find you out.
Yeah.
And so we decided to recycle a part of the previous walls and then build new walls to mix it and to make it into a kind of, new city out of old destroyed ruins.
Nice.
So the whole idea about this, the ruin of the soul, the ruin of also the physical ruin, and in a way we also understand that perhaps this is a way to contextualize the work in the Roman setting, in the context of Rome, that it's also a city that has been built and rebuilt many, many times over many, many layers of ruins. So you can see that the exhibition has been really a effort to test out how to contextualize this and to make it truly erotic.
Now you know why Hanru is my teacher. Just as Tomatsu was Daido's teacher, as a curator, Hanru has taught me so much about how to curate. Because what you just described was so layered and so structural. And even if you don't know it, you feel it. That coherence and chaos both. Congratulations.
Well, of course, this has been a very, time-consuming effort of the team with Elena here and also Claudia Reale and also our construction team, our technical team, to really to design, redesign, and also there's a lot of back and forth between Rome and Tokyo.
Of course.
In the lockdown time. It's been a really very interesting working process with Daido, who is at his 84 now, and he could not travel to here. But we have almost like a live conversation with him. And then we also had...
You take a picture, we can send him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also he has done a new interview for the exhibition.
This is for Daido. We're going to send it to him.
So in the exhibition, you can see there's a series of films that we selected from various exhibitions, and a new film in conversation with Daido.
Yeah.
And so
It's nostalgic for me. Yeah, and yes, well, congratulations, and really just, it's really brilliant. It is a brilliant show and a brilliant exposition of Daido's work, but also I think it makes sense in Rome. It just makes me feel, it feels like Rome too.
Yeah. Abbiamo sì, alcune domande, non lo so, abbiamo ancora 10 minuti per... Sì. C'è una... Sì.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for your amazing intervention. I really enjoyed the presentation and the contextualization of Moriyama's work. And and I was thinking, first of all, I was just thinking that you never mentioned, no one of you, William Klein.
Right.
It's nothing, I mean, it's a completely different, I mean, it's not so different, I think,
different. Actually, Daido himself
I think,
claimed that he was very much influenced by
Yeah,
it.
he was. He's missing.
Yeah, okay.
It's true.
Okay, so
Yeah.
because I always think that, thought that his work is quite similar, especially in the book New York from 1955.
Yes,
that's this kind of vision. But anyway, my question was also about do you know if there was any connection with Mishima himself, or because Moriyama was quite close with Hijikata, you say, Heigo Hosoe.
Yeah.
I don't know about Shinoyama Kishin as well, but so I was wondering if there was any direct contact at the time, to your knowledge.
Grazie. Thank you for a very, very excellent question. Yes, I think today, just for lack of time, we could have had a whole lecture just on the impact of not only William Klein, but the others, Eugene Smith and Mary Margaret Burke, who were also in and out of Tokyo and whose work was known to these photographers for sure. So this was part, it's very important because these photographers saw themselves as citizens of the world, and they were aware through the circulation of magazines, including photography magazines in the 1960s, of an international movement through social realism, then through photojournalism, and then through giants like William Klein. And they knew artists in common because William Klein was there. He was photographing Ushio Shinohara doing boxing painting in 1960. And the architect Isozaki was also part of this group. So in terms of the question of whether Daido Moriyama actually knew Mishima, Ming, do we know? Do you know that?
Yes, he was assisting.
He was assisting Hosoe, that's right. Yes, that's true. Yes.
I read it from an interview.
Yeah, vero. Yeah, so the answer is yes. He was actually absolutely right. There in that crazy Rococo house, doing crazy things. What relationship they had, I don't know. Mishima hung out with artists, and Mishima hung out at gay bars, and Mishima hung out in bars generally. So, it was a very tight-knit group. So, and Shinjuku, that's where Mishima hung out, in the gay bars in Shinjuku. So, I think they certainly knew each other. And Mishima, of course, kills himself in 1970, which would have been a big shock to this group. But, by the late 60s, he's being somewhat alienated because of his own very right-wing pro-emperor ideologies and pro-military ideologies. So I think the avant-garde, the leftist avant-garde, like Nakahira and Mishima, I don't think you want in the same room. And the second part of your question? Yeah, Mishima, okay. Grazie.
Yeah, thanks very much for a really beautiful talk. I was just wondering about the use of the word erotic.
Yeah.
and whether in Japan, like, these artists consider their work erotic too, or if it's like a Western kind of perspective.
Oh, that's a fun question. And it brings us back to Kishin Shinoyama and, of course, Araki, who was also part of this group. There's a slight age difference of 5 years, but they really are all part of the same idea. They use the word ero. I mean, ero, the kind of compilation of really the French, and it becomes in katakana, and it becomes ero, and they use it in their texts, and they use it in their language. They're very, very aware of it. But whether erotic, I mean, they had many layers of erotic because they had Hollywood erotic, they had Playboy erotic that was coming in, they had military erotic, and they had their own very, very strong tradition of erotic, literary as well as visual. And you had in the 1970s, movies like Oshima, The Realm of the Senses coming out. The corporeal, the body, wasn't, I don't think, seen in terms of like gender at all. It was just seen in terms of, like a raw expression of the self and of corporeal reality in a world where you could be annihilated any minute. One way to know your life and feel your life is through very raw sex. And it's that kind of rawness, not another kind of romantic love, it's erotic love. It's the act, it's the physical act. I think runs through a lot of the work of this time, and of course you see it in Buto too. Absolutely. I mean, and it's very combined with death also, eros and death, and that's totally what Mishima's piece is all about, is eros and death, and that's what Ankogabuto is around, is eros and death. So, Ming, do you have anything to add to that?
Erotic is a very political act and sort of positionality in the post-war period, where it's sort of a real rejection of mainstream morals and also a sense of having been duped by certain ideologies, right? And so the body becomes a recourse of knowledge that's very important. And you see this in literature as well.
Yeah. There's a whole school of decadent literature in the late 1940s and early 50s, actually called decadent school, that also is like, it's down in those filthy gutters that Mishima is talking about.
Hi. You mentioned before that you were in 82 in that platform, so I was just curious how long, I think you can speak fluently Japanese, and you spent time in Japan. I was wondering how much time you spent and what were your research there?
Oh, that's a long question. Let's go have a drink afterwards. Now, I was very fortunate. I did grow up in Japan from the age of 13. That was during the 70s. And I went back during my college years, which was in the late 70s and early 80s. I went for a year and I stayed for 5 years. I ran away from home. I did not know these artists then. I, at that time, was very, very steeped in classical Japanese culture, primarily in Kyoto. I was in Tokyo, but I was studying no dance. I was dressing up like this. So it was really only when I came to New York to work at Japan Society, as Hanru mentioned, in 1982, when I encountered many, many Japanese artists who were living in New York, including Ushio Shinohara, who was being photographed by Eugene Smith, by William Klein in 1960, doing the boxing painting as part of Neo-Dada organizer event. And Arakawa was there, Yoko Ono was there, On Kawada was there, and it's through the New York artists that I began to learn about Kusama, and that I began to realize that there was a story that needed to be told. So my discovery of the need to tell the story of post-war Japanese art history and to write a history really was born in New York, and then I had to go back and put the pieces together.
One day we are going to have Alexandra to curate something special.
I'd love it. No, actually, my show, if I can say, that Hanru kindly mentioned, Japanese art after 1945, Scream Against the Sky, it was very radical at the time because I had Tomatsu in it. I had Tomatsu and Ankokubuto in it, and Hijikata, and the formal Japanese conservators thought this was shocking. Yeah.
David Diao gave me the book.
Yeah, I know. You told me that many times. I love it.
Okay. Last question.
Grazie mille per l'interessante discussione.
Ultima domanda. Elena, dai.
No, I'm deeply jealous about your past, about your present, and I studied Moriyama since 3 years, but everything is already new, so it's incredible, and thank you for this. To be honest, I have no question, but I've been really enriched by your lecture today, so thank you.
Grazie.
I just would like to leave the voice to Daido, that of course is not here with us, but sent us a short video message.
Okay.
いや、とにかくトーマスさんの写真も僕の写真もいいぞと、見てくれよ、お願いだから見てくださいよってね、まあそれぞれねどういうふうにご覧になるかはね、もうやっぱり写真っていうのは見られる方によってもうどんどん変わっていくわけですから、だからどのように変わって見られてもいいけど、やっぱり一種のそれぞれのトーマスさんの写真、僕の写真が持つある種のインパクトはやっぱり場所が変わってもね、国が変わってもやっぱりこう共通するものがあると思うんで、それを見てもらいたいなと思いますね。
ありがとうございます。
ぜひ見てください。よろしくお願いします。
Great. I just finally, on behalf of the Guggenheim Museum, I do want to thank our very esteemed colleague Hou Hanru, who is a founding member of the Guggenheim's Asian Art Council, and also a advisor to Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. So I want to thank and acknowledge you on behalf of my institution.
That becomes serious. Grazie mille. Allora, spero che non perdiamo la possibilità di avere questo libro
Sì.
alla libreria. Grazie.
Grazie.